Hi, everybody. Good morning on this beautiful, wonderful, sunny, gorgeous day here in the middle. No, I'm just kidding. It's horrible and rainy and cold. But I hope everybody is doing well. I was really looking forward to seeing you guys here in person. God willing, God willing, God willing, next week we will be back here. I believe you're going to be with Rabbi Mordecai next week, and then Reverend Zworenstein the following. And then you will have me back, and then we have some guest speakers aligned with, I think there's two out of those four ones that I'll be doing. But today we have a great, wonderful session, and it's too bad no one's coming for lunch because I'm going to eat all of that lunch, which is not going to be good for me. And I blame COVID for that. But we've had quite a bit of developments, I suppose, over the last couple of times that I spoke to you, because we were speaking. I think the last time I was with you guys was, I don't remember. We were talking about the potential government possibilities after, I think it was the third election, or maybe the fourth. I don't remember what it was. So now we have a government. Yay! And whatever you think about that government, it is a government, and we have a functioning government in Israel. I want to try and go explain a little bit about what happened, the election, the results, and then we'll talk and see the development, not just of the potential parties and the blocks and whatever, and if there's time, maybe talk a little bit about how that's going to what it's going to look like going forward, and is it really actually any different than the government that was before. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be trying to keep an eye on that. If not, Ollie will be monitoring that as well, because I'm going to be trying to seamlessly transition between a couple different slides. But as I said, it's a shame that no one is actually here. So without further ado, so we have a new government, finally. So we know that there was another election, and after considerable upheaval and debate, and we have the following results, which looks quite a bit different. And I should have put the slide from the previous election, but Yesh Atid dropped precipitously. They were neck and neck with Netanyahu, the Likud party, after the previous election. And you can see here all the different parties that are involved. You have Yesh Atid, Shas, led still by Aryeh Deri, Blue and White by Benny Gantz, Yamina, Naftali Bennett, Labor, Merav Michaeli, which is odd to see Labor only down at 7 seats, whereas about, 20 years ago, they were the leader. They had 4 times as many seats as that. Then you have UTJ, which is Moshe Gafni. That's one of the religious parties. Yisrael Beitenu by Avigdor Lieberman. The religious Zionists, the Joint Lists, New Hope, Meretz, and finally the United Arab Lists. Now, what does this tell us about the potential parties? Well, it's technically what's called a hung parliament. And I learned what this was when I was living in the UK, because for the first time in I forgot how long, there was an election in 2000, was it 14 maybe or something like that? I can't remember, or 15, where neither party, the 3 major parties, Tories and the Labour, none of them had a majority in parliament, which is the first time that had happened in quite a while. So the Tories had to go into a coalition government with the Lib Dems. Now, if only, right? If only it was as simple as that. But let's look at what the potential for the right and the left-leaning parties are here. Whoa, that's not me. That was really strange. All good? Perfect. So this is what the parties look like. And now what we're going to look at is the potential, the 2 different sides. Okay, so if there was a right-wing bloc, right, a right-wing bloc would look with these four parties: Likud, Shas, United Torah Judaism, and Religious Zionists. Now, you might ask yourself, those of you who know Hebrew, Yamina is technically, right? Yamina, which is right here, is technically a right-wing party, right? They are technically a right-wing party. Right here. So why aren't they included there? For a variety of reasons, but Naftali Bennett also, you may or may not know, him and Netanyahu are not what I would call besties. They really don't get along for a variety of reasons. But theoretically, they could have been in a coalition there, but you'll notice that is only going to add 7 seats. That's 59. The really interesting one that's not included here, New Hope, that's 6 seats. That's also a conservative right-leaning party. Theoretically, they should be considered in this right bloc government. Why then were they not considered and made part of this right voting bloc? Well, Gideon Sa'ar, the leader of the New Hope, he refused to enter into a government led by Netanyahu. And I want to be clear, it wasn't Likud. He did not want to be in a government that was led by Netanyahu. And a couple other party leaders of different parties had made that statement or that as a condition. But this one really was backbreaking for a potential government for Netanyahu and Likud going forward, because without him, without the New Hope party, there was no hope for Netanyahu. Interestingly, Netanyahu was willing to entertain some kind of an agreement, whether it be a passive support or time-to-time support with the United Arab List. But the Religious Zionist Party, led by Bezalel Smotrich, he said, under no circumstances will I be in a government that includes or is supported by the United Arab List. Okay, so we're at the right-wing side. That's 52 seats. And if you replace Netanyahu, theoretically, you could get up to a majority government. But that was not the case. That was not going to happen in this case. Now, just want to check any questions there. Oops. Nope, no questions yet. Brilliant. So, left-wing bloc. We have a few more arrows here. You have the main party. You have, internet blog. Okay. Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid. That is the main center-left party, 17 seats. You have the blue and white party, which up until 2 elections ago were doing really well. Now they're not. He was the one who was in the government with Netanyahu. He was the alternate prime minister, was supposed to switch, and didn't take long for that agreement to fall apart. You have Labor, you have Israel Beitenu with Avigdor Lieberman, A New Hope, which is sort of, it's center right, so they could go either way. And you have Meretz, which is Nitzan Horowitz, also with 6 seats. So that's 51. However, you may have noticed that there are still some parties that I haven't mentioned, right? Now, when you have this many parties, you have some people who are inevitably, I suppose, not invited to the party. Who are they? The kingmakers or queenmakers, whichever you want to call it, right? You have the following 3 parties that were not initially included in the coalition forming discussions. You have Yamina, which is led by Naftali Bennett. You have Joint Lists, Ayman Odeh, and United Arab List, which is Mansour Abbas. Now, as happens in many coalition governments, small parties can have a tremendously outsized influence based on their importance to making the coalition the majority, far outstripping their actual size in votes. And you've seen this happen before with the religious parties when they're relatively small, but because they are the difference between the majority and the minority, they are promised and are given, and they can control and command a tremendous amount of power, in these negotiations. So what happens? What happens here? So we're going to come back to these slides in just a minute. So in the meantime, you have lots and lots and lots of discussion. So you had originally the government that was formed. I can't remember exactly when it was. The Netanyahu Benny Gantz rotation, that was not even a year ago, and then again it fell apart. And by the way, that was the first time that it was a legally binding system of rotation and position of prime minister. And you may remember in the 80s we had that as well, but that was a slightly different situation. It wasn't legally binding, but they still went through with it. That was Yitzhak Shamir and I forgot the other one. I think it was doesn't matter. We'll come back to that one. Now it was inaugurated. What's the date today? It's so a little over a week ago. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we got there, because it was not smooth sailings by any stretch of the imagination. So the first thing to understand is because Netanyahu had the majority of the votes, he had a plurality of votes with 30. He was invited by Moshe Rivlin, who was the president when this started, to be invited to try and form a government. Okay, invited to try and form a government. Now, that's didn't quite work. As I said, his right-wing bloc had 52 seats, but the other parties, Yamina, for example, he wanted to form a government, but it was not going to be enough without the New Hope party by Gideon Sar. They were not going to be invited into. He refused. Not they weren't invited. He refused to be in any negotiations where Netanyahu was going to be the leader of the parties and the prime minister. And also, if Netanyahu had included the United Arab list, the religious Zionist parties would have pulled out, and again would not have given them the threshold over 60 votes to have the majority government. So Netanyahu has the election was on in the early April. I think it was the 5th or 4th of April, I believe, and then immediately Rivlin, the way it works, the president invites someone in the Knesset who has the most, usually the first attempt is who has the most seats, to try and form a government. And he does that on April 6th. He was given the first mandate to establish the coalition by the president, Reuven Rivlin. I think I said Moshe Rivlin before. It's Reuven Rivlin. I apologize. So Netanyahu tried to wheel and deal, as all those people in that position try and do. And he's offering a variety of different rotation agreements, changing the hands of the prime minister from time to time. I have a feeling, and I haven't been able to confirm that, but I have a feeling that there are some people who were looking at that agreement with some wariness, because he had that agreement with Naftali Bennett, Benny Gantz, and it promptly fell apart. So he was going to perhaps offer the post to a fellow Likud member and Knesset Speaker, Yariv Levin. He also tried to include Aryeh Deri of Shas, and then the alternate, the current prime minister, alternate prime minister, Benny Gantz, into some kind of agreements. But ultimately, these he had about a month, 4 weeks, to try and come up with an agreement. And ultimately, on the 4th of May, at midnight. It expired, and he was unsuccessful. While this was happening, and before they actually even had the mandate from Reuven Rivlin, there were agreements in place. To discussions with the so-called change bloc, and the change bloc is several of the different parties. For example, Yesh Atid. Who else? Yesh Atid, Blue and White, Yamina, Labor, and so on and so forth. Some of those who were going to attempt to, as I say, change the leadership. Now, this was nominally led by Lapid, and he wanted to enter initially into rotation government with Naftali Bennett, and even offered him the opportunity to hold the post of prime minister for the first half of the Knesset term. So in essence, what they're trying to do is what's called a national unity government. And this has happened a few times in Israel's history. Notably, one of them was in right before and during the 6-Day War, when you had the right and the left forming in a time of national emergency, and you bring in people from the variety of the political spectrum to have a unity government in time of crisis. And that was in essence what they were trying to do. However, questions arise immediately because you're going to have so many different parties representing such a huge, diverse spectrum of the political spectrum. Obviously, the questions come up. Well, who is going to have which position? Because there are a variety of different government positions in the portfolios in the cabinet, and very important committees in the Knesset. And if you're going to share that with your political ideological opposite, yet you're in the government together, how is that actually going to function and to work, right? Most of these unity governments don't last for a tremendous amount of time for the obvious reasons. It just becomes impossible over a long period of time to maintain the working relationship that they have. And then there's also who's going to get which ministerial portfolios, how you're going to distribute them between the right, the center, and the left, and also any potential veto of the coalition parties, who gets to come in and who's not in. Another concern, it wasn't abundantly clear that even with this unity government to oust Netanyahu, that the 7 parties who were in discussion initially were going to actually be able to have a majority in parliament, in the Knesset. So they were going to, in essence, be a minority government, depending on support from parties outside their coalition, such as United Arab List, United Torah Judaism, and so on, and which would be unpalatable to the various different parties in this governing coalition, or this potential governing coalition. So these talks, even they're very nascent, they came up with a tremendous amount of obstacles and challenges. But again, I want to be clear, these were happening while they didn't have the mandate from Reuven Rivlin to begin negotiating for that. As I said, Netanyahu's mandate expires on the 4th of May, about 4 weeks after. Now, just to be clear, during this time period, Netanyahu is still leading because a new government hasn't formed, so he's still the incumbent, and they're still leading, even though it's not a functioning government. So you may understand, for example, one of the practical side effects of that, a budget is not passed. Here in Australia, the previous ambassador has left, and Jonathan, I forgot his last name. He has now taken over as the acting ambassador because he was in charge of the affairs. They brought him in. He was not able to be confirmed by the Knesset to be the ambassador, even though he's functioning as that. So there are practical implications if there is no functioning government. Yair Lapid was then because Netanyahu's mandate to form a government expired on the 4th of May at midnight. Yair Lapid was then tasked by President Rivlin to have a mandate. He was nominated or recommended by 56 Knesset members from 7 factions. Now, let me just check my math here. 56 is less than 50% of 120. So they're close, and Netanyahu was also very close, but not quite there. So you have then the options realistically are to either co-opt a few members of Likud. You try and co-opt some members of some of the other parties. And then you start to have individual members of some of the parties beginning to voice some concern. So even though you include New Hope, you include parts of the joint list, you're really only, practically speaking, at 58 or 57 seats. Okay, so we're not quite there, but we are very, very, very close. So let me, he is then, you start to, and I mean, if you have a chance, there's a few different publications of notes of these meetings now and the whirlwind tour of how this worked out over the course from the 5th of May till when he announced the agreement in place. And you will see it was like within, I think it was within an hour or so of his mandate expiring. Okay, but there's talks between the different parties in the bloc, Yisrael Beitenu. All of them come with their conditions, their laundry list of demands, or they might not call it demands, but you want me in your government, you have to give me either these promises on government priorities that will happen, or these sets of ministerial seats, or Knesset committee members, or a promise to revoke this or do that, or whatever the case may be. And you're going shopping, so why not? You come with your list of demands because you know that he needs you more than you need him, sort of. So Yisrael Beitenu, they have a list of conditions. What they want, what Yisrael Beitenu really wanted more than anything was a few different things. So, but understand, Yisrael Beitenu, that's led by Avigdor Lieberman, they're secular, okay? It's important to understand they're secular center-right, and they're a nationalist political party, okay? And they're originally, their core demographic, I would say, is Russian-speaking Israelis. That is initially what formed them. That the dominance of that group in that party is in decline. Okay, so what do they want? The following conditions. They want a 2-term limit for the prime minister. They want compulsory voting in elections, compulsory conscription for male ultra-Orthodox Jews, putting more focus on secular studies in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, a penalty of life imprisonment for the rape of a minor, allowing local authorities to decide on the closure of businesses on Saturdays, the introduction of civil law marriage, as well as a new, not 1, 2-year state budget. Now, that sounds fantastic. That also sounds like a huge reach. But if they can get that, that's great. They also wanted to set up, along with all of those requirements, they wanted 2 state commissions of inquiry. Okay, 2. Number 1, to investigate the government, the previous government, Netanyahu's government, of possible culpability in the circumstances which led to the stampede at Mount Meron on April 30th. I think it was Lag BaOmer, yeah, April 30th, as well as an independent inquiry into the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of these sound great, except remember now, you are in negotiation with 6, 7, 8 other parties. So what the secular parties want is not necessarily what some of the religious parties or the religious leaning parties might want. And interestingly, and I was surprised to learn this, that the proposal to allow civil marriages was opposed not by some of the religious parties, but from the United Arab List, because they saw it as a violation of family values. Okay? They did not want to endorse this idea of civil marriages. Okay? That was Naftali Bennett's, Yisrael Beitenu with Avigdor Lieberman, his conditions of being included in the coalition, these things that he wanted to focus on, okay? Most importantly, understand a bunch of secular values to be included there, which is not to say, by the way, that Yair Lapid is tremendously, or Benny Gantz are in favor of religious parties and their values, but I think more is that they didn't necessarily, were not interested in rocking the boat too much, where Avigdor Lieberman is really gung-ho about trying to erode or decrease the influence of the religious parties in Israel itself. Then, and by the way, that's only 2 days into the negotiations. On May 8th, there starts to become known in the media that there is, because remember, this coalition was beginning to have conversations in the background during Netanyahu's failed attempt to form a government. Okay, and really, what's starting to coalesce is that we're really they are really close, but there's still tremendous disagreement on the distribution of who's going to get what seats in the, not just in the cabinets, but also in the Knesset committee chambers. So the major portfolios that are really important, justice, that was Yamina wanted it, New Hope wanted it, education, Yamina wanted it, New Hope wanted it, Meretz wanted it, defense was wanted by Benny Gantz and a New Hope. In addition, besides these justice and education ministries, Yamina also wanted portfolios of public security and religious affairs. And why did they want those? Because those were quote unquote ideological in nature, right? Religious affairs obviously is religious, public security as well is considered ideological in nature. However, aside from these disputes, and they were serious, there was at this point already coalescing this idea that Naftali Bennett, excuse me, and Yair Lapid, they would be the front runners emerging to be serving as prime minister alternatively. One for 2 years, the other one for 2 years. Remember, the term technically is a 4-year term, and then there's scheduled elections. When Bennett is the prime minister, Lapid would be the foreign minister, and Avigdor Lieberman would be the finance minister. Okay? Then they also were in discussion not only of the prime minister, alternate prime minister, foreign minister, finance minister, which are all very important, powerful ministries. There was also reportedly some kind of understanding that the speaker of the Knesset would also be in a rotation as well. Mayor Cohen of Yesh Atid, New Hope also would be in that rotation. And then also Yamina comes to join the party and saying it's going to give its support for the coalition if they're able to have the chairmanship of, they understood they might not get some of the Knesset, not the Knesset, excuse me, the minister portfolios, but they would lead the Knesset committees, internal or economic affairs, and also the United Arab List. They're going to be invited. They wanted specifically, not necessarily, I think they understood they might not get a ministerial position, but they wanted commitment that they were going to be improving living standards and conditions of Israeli Arabs, a 5-year economic plan for the community, a plan to decrease violent crime among Arabs, the annulment of 2019 law banning illegal construction, and also issues with the Bedouins in the Negev. They don't have formal recognition in some of their settlements because they never, doesn't matter. That's what they want. We can chase that squirrel also, will be here for forever. Okay, so don't necessarily need to remember all the details, but you can see all the various different moving pieces, and you have to, and the horse trading that has to happen to commit to having a government. You need all these different players and promising different, or at least committing to, in exchange for my support, I get X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. Just checking if there are any questions so far. Wow, no questions so far. Everybody's following this. This is amazing. I'm very happy that this is so clear as mud. So that is just the first 3 days of the negotiations. Then you have, you start to have further discussions that they're getting really, really close, okay? Yamina and the United Arab List, they are in a sort of a separate discussion. Sorry, the Change Bloc and Yamina, they agreed to the United Arab List demands. Remember, Yamina is sort of on the outside of the Change Bloc because they're the right-leaning party. And so you have the left bloc would be trying to negotiate both with Yamina, the right, and United Arab List. And so they begin to agree to some of their conditions, such as the 5-year economic plan, improving the living conditions of the Arabs, decreasing the violent crime, and so on and so forth. They wanted, and with the issue of the Negev Bedouins, they wanted recognition of 3 Negev Bedouin communities. They got a budget to tackle violent crime in the Arab community. And therefore, by agreeing to this, they received the United Arab List conditional backing. This was on the 10th of May, which, however, at this point, it wasn't that they were going to be in the government coalition. They were going to be as a, they call it, sorry, we're in my notes here. It's a confidence and supply arrangement, which I never heard of before. But in essence, what that means is, I assume symbolically for reasons, they did not want to be actively part in the coalition, which would cause problems with some of the other parties, but they would commit to voting with them, even though they're not formally part of the coalition. Okay? So this would have mean that the government would have been a minority government, and they would be backed by the United Arab List. And if that would have been the case, that would have been the first time that a government would have been supported by the United Arab List. Okay? On the side, the Change Bloc and Yamina had reached some other mutual understandings. What they wanted to do was avoid major discussions on matters of religion, unless they would have broad support for whatever decision would be in that area. I can't imagine what that would be. Broad support for a religious discussion or a religious agreement when you have parties on the left and the right. They're going to agree on, I really don't even know what that would look like. But okay, in theory, that was written down. What else was there? Sorry. Then they also were going to be, oops, skip page on my notes. Okay, they would, okay, the broad, okay, decision to continue, and this is important, to continue Netanyahu's policies regarding the West Bank. What is that? Maintain existing, right? Maintain existing settlements there, further construction within those existing settlements, but crucially here, the distinction is not allow any new settlements, and perhaps even more important, not to annex any new areas of the West Bank. And then also the possibility of setting up a state commission of inquiry to investigate, as we said, the stampede at Mount Meron on Lag BaOmer. So that's where we're at this point. Again, we seem to have coalesced around a minority government with United Arabists in support, not formally part of the government itself. Then you have, they were also considering introducing new legislative ideas, such as limiting the prime minister to 2 full terms, and crucially for them, not including a grandfather clause, which practically would have meant that Netanyahu would never be able to return to the position of prime minister. And also, anyone who has been indicted could not receive the mandate to form a government from the president, and could neither be the prime minister or the leader of the opposition. Okay, if you recall, I spoke about this, I think, a year or so ago when Netanyahu was indicted. There is a law on I think it's a law or a custom, I'm pretty sure it's a law that Knesset members, not Knesset members, excuse me, ministers have to resign if they're indicted, except for the prime minister. The prime minister, or she, excuse me, if they're indicted, they can still serve. Okay, but any other minister in the government, if they are indicted, they have to resign. The prime minister did not. This would change that and remove that exception. And negotiations, they also wanted to split one of the parties, the New Hope party, wanted to split the division of attorney general into 2 separate offices, creating a general prosecutor and the attorney general. And they continued to trade who was going to get which seats with negotiations. Notably, Benny Gantz was probably going to continue in the role of defense minister. And different parties were making claims, and ones that didn't. When they had competing claims, they were counseled. They were not counseled. Excuse me. There was some consolation that they were given committee chairmanships instead in the Knesset. Yair Lapid was very, very, very close by the end of the second week, or close to the second week of May, informing the president that he was going to present this plan, and with the idea to be sworn in sometime after Shavuot, which would have been around the 18th or 19th of May. However, what happened? What happened? Something intervened, right? Something intervened. There was a war that broke out. A war broke out on the 10th of May. There were clashes in Jerusalem coming towards, I'm not going to get into how it started, just for our purposes here. It began, and it lasted for not quite 2 weeks. And in this case, and then Israel retaliated, and it lasted for quite a while. And then the government, the formation of the government was frozen indefinitely. United Arabists refused to continue. They were so close. They were so close. They refused to finalize the negotiations with the change bloc and Yamina until the security situation was finalized or resolved. But then Mansour Abbas, the leader of the United Arabists, he then came out and said he's willing to continue the talks. However, the violence needs to be brought under control first. Then on the 13th of May and the 14th of May, and in that evening, Yamina, the right-leaning party of the change bloc, they abandoned the coalition talks. And Naftali Bennett saying that he no longer favored establishing a government, which would be crucially supported by the United Arab List. Obviously, because of the security situation happening there, so that couldn't happen. He felt that it would be impossible to deal with the security challenges, the legal consequences, because remember, it wasn't just the fighting in Gaza and the rockets being launched. There was also civil unrest in Israel itself. I think it was in the city of Lod and somewhere else, where Jews attacked Arabs and Arabs attacked Jews within the city. And that was actually quite disconcerting, and seeing that for the first time the level of violence within Israel itself, between Israel and Israeli Arabs. And Israeli Arabs. Excuse me. Then they decided Bennett, who he decides, okay, now I'm going to go, rather than this change block, I'm going to try and resume talks with Likud and to form a broad unity government, which would include Yesh Atid, Blue and White, New Hope, and Likud. He was also perhaps interested in, again, turning back to the prime minister position directly elected. As you recall, there was a brief experiment with that in the late 90s, which very quickly was undone because you ended up having a situation where the prime minister was elected directly, but his party was not in the majority. So in a parliamentary system, I don't understand how that is actually supposed to work, but there we go. He was willing to support, Mansour Abbas was, again, willing to support this, but it needed to, again, the quality of life of the Israeli Arabs needed to be improved, and so on and so forth. Government ministers from Blue and White, however, they out of hand rejected the possibility of entering into new government with Netanyahu, as did A New Hope. So this was an idea that quickly foundered because there was no support from a lot of the other parties to go into coalition government with Netanyahu. I want to be clear, it's not with Likud, it's with Netanyahu. But even still, Likud and Yamina, they reached a formal agreement on a new government. The Yamina would be given 8 places in the coalition's top 40 candidates in the next Knesset election. They're already talking about going to another election, by the way. And Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, they would serve as Netanyahu's defense and foreign ministers. But Lapid was still trying to form a change bloc, and he would keep going until the mandate expired. He had another 2 weeks left at this point. And interestingly, he was willing to go to a 5th election or 5th or 6th election within 2 years or something like that, which is unheard of. But I guess it's Israel, and we strive to do things in the best way possible. Just checking, still no questions. Excellent, or not. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. So Bennett, again, because he has the mandate, he effectively, again, on the 23rd of May now, changed his position again, that he would be open to now serving with Lapid. And then a few days later, on the 25th of May, Meretz agreed to a coalition government. And then Lapid said he would be giving them important ministries of health, environment, and regional cooperation if the government gets formed. Treasury would still go to Avigdor Lieberman. Lapid and Bennett met a couple days later on the 27th, but interestingly, that was a secret meeting, and people from some of the other parties, such as Yamina, didn't know about it. Lapid then, on the next day, the 28th, he got the approval of the Labor Party to join, and then finally, once these backroom channels negotiations were well underway, Bennett then formally announces in public that he was in favor of a unity government, where he would be prime minister for 2 years until September 2023, and then Yair Lapid would take over. But we're not quite there yet. Okay, now remember, the mandate expires on at the midnight on June 1st, or between June 1st and June 2nd. So we're very, 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 very close, but we're not quite there. So Bennett again changed his. We did that, and then so who do we need still? We need the United Arab parties. The United Arab List, Mansour Abbas. And this time, however, they want to be a fully fledged member of the coalition, not just in support of a minority government. What they wanted this time was the position of Deputy Interior Minister, who would probably serve under the Ayelet Shaked of Yamina. However, there were also 4 out of the 6 Knesset members from the joint list, which is different from the Arab list. They did not want to be part of either the Netanyahu bloc or the Change bloc. And they also now were not going to support the new Bennett Lapid government. Okay, now why is that? So just so you understand, the joint list is a political alliance of 4 Arab majority political parties in Israel: Balad, Hadash, Ta'al, and the Arab Democratic Party. Okay, they were the United Arab List was part of that, and they left. Okay. There's also somewhere in here, and I forgot where I put it. There's a Israeli Communist Party or something like that. But so they are, so 2 of those, 4 out of the 6 were not going to support this. Here you go. The Israeli Communist Party were not going to support it. But however, the Ta'al faction, they didn't know yet what they were going to do. Now we're getting to the evening of June 1st. We're getting really, 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 really close. And then the negotiations stall once again. They have 1 more day still. The night of the 2nd, it finishes, not the 1st. They have some time still. Now, Ayelet Shaked from Yamina changed her. She wanted to be the Knesset's Judicial Appointments Committee, on that committee, excuse me. Lapid had already promised that to the Labor Party's Michaeli. The next morning, the United Arab List also encountered some new things. They reported that Netanyahu, who was still serving as prime minister at this point, was going to repeal one of the things that was their one of their big demands, illegal housing construction, and therefore, because that was already done, the United Arab List party decided, well, we already have that. Now we want even more from you, Lapid, or from Bennett, because Netanyahu's already given that. So I don't need that from you anymore. I need more. And it was a very calculated move from Netanyahu. So as their United Arab List is demanding even more, the right-wing parties in Yamina were starting to say, like, hey, hang on a minute, the United Arab List, they're going to be in this coalition. They're asking for too much, because they were, Yamina and New Hope, the right-wing parties, they were against this repeal of this law, which is interesting. They didn't repeal it, Netanyahu did, but still it muddied up the waters. At the same moment, because there's nothing else they need to be focusing on, there's also the election of the new Israeli president. Reuven Rivlin is finishing his term. He was not running. I don't think he was even eligible to run for re-election. And Yitzhak Herzog, he was overwhelmingly elected to be the 11th president of Israel in the midst of this formation of the government. I forgot exactly what the vote was, but he won with almost 90 votes, as I recall. 87 votes. On the night of June 2nd, right, we are now mere hours away from the mandate expiring. And what happens when the mandate expires is that it's returned back to the president, who then throws it. Theoretically, you can ask for a week extension, but that's only if you're convinced and committed to the fact that you already have the government and it will be sworn in within the week. If it doesn't, then the president returns the mandate to the Knesset as a whole, and anyone can attempt to form a government within the Knesset. Okay. So they get to a point. Yamina made a formal offer to Labor, because remember, there's this Judicial Appointments Committee. And so what the proposal was they, just like the prime minister was going to rotate, the membership on this committee would rotate, and not just the leadership, but also individual members would rotate to maintain the ideological balance. So we're just about there. And there's some last minute, and the very few hours they begin to come with this proposal, and it starts to take form. You have the various different parties are going to agree to the distribution of the ministerial portfolios. You have the rotation of the prime minister. You also have the rotation of the committee, the Judicial Appointments Committee. So under the deal, Bennett would serve, Lapid would be, I skipped ahead. No. Okay, so Lapid would be, when he would become prime minister, Bennett would be the interior minister, as well as being alternate prime minister. Shaked would be justice minister, and Saar would take over as foreign minister. So that's after Bennett was prime minister. This is in the second half of the government. 3 hours before the deadline. There's plenty of time left. 3 hours before the deadline, the Southern Islamic Movement Shura Council authorized finally, officially, the United Arab List to give its conditional support to the Bennett-Lapid government. However, it was a promise that negotiations would continue on the repealing of this law that Netanyahu said he was going to do, but he didn't quite actually do. And the Bedouin villages in the Negev would be given formal legal status. Again, that's 3 hours before the mandate ends. A new problem is that one of Yamina's members, Nir Orbach, that he was considering voting against the government in the Knesset. The problem there would be that this was the bare slimmest of margins. The government, as it was going to be constituted, was going to have 61 votes. If you lose one, it goes to a tie, and it's 60 votes against 60 votes. So there were negotiations, and it finally was. They finally get there. Lapid informs outgoing President Reuven Rivlin, with less than an hour to go, that they've come to an agreement, and they can form the new government. I think some of you may have seen this picture. He is watching. He's watching a football game, I think it was. He was going on to announce the winner or something like that, and his aide or someone gives him the phone, and he says, "Yeah, oh yeah, good, great, new government, fantastic. I'm watching a game. That's wonderful. Bye-bye." And it's a brilliant video and a brilliant picture. Only in Israel, right? The president is like, "Yeah, great, we have a government for the first time in like however many years, but I'm watching a game, so we'll deal with it later." There are some questions. Let's see here. Too many cooks spoil the broth. Would you agree that our problem is finding one strong leader that will unite the country? No, I don't think it's one leader that's going to unite the country. I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I think there's a few structural things. Well, let me get to that. One second. Let me just finish the actual formation of the government. Had he not succeed, yeah. So with less than an hour to go, he gets the mandate. He said he's going to fulfill the government, form the government. Thankfully, that did not have to go to another election itself. On the 11th of June, Bennett's Yamina party became the last opposition faction to sign the coalition with Lapid's Yesh Atid. And then the new government was supposed to be sworn in on the 13th of June. The 12th of June, everything was signed and agreed. And the basic guidelines of the new government policy would be the following. Okay, a bill to set the term limits for the prime minister and only one re-election, although the details have not been set up yet. The setting up of a commission to investigate the stampede at Mount Meron, which was done, I think, yesterday. Getting rid of 4 government ministries, increasing the old age income supplement, reform package to disabled war veterans. This is interesting, the creation of more competition among the providers of kashrut services and the introduction of consistent standards in the area of kashrut supervision, as well as the changing of the body which selects the chief rabbi, so to allow the election of a Zionist to the position, which, if you follow the religious affairs in Israel, that's actually a huge deal. It's very, very important. And also changing in the way conversions will apply with municipal rabbinical authorities. So we're just about there. And then there are some shenanigans with the speaker, the outgoing speaker of Knesset, Yariv Levin, who was a Likud member, that he would delay the vote for as long as possible. So on the 3rd of June, the change bloc initiated a motion of no confidence in Levin with the aim of replacing him with someone from Yesh Atid, who would then bring the vote closer. Because remember, even just because the vote is, or the government they're technically formed and ready to go, they still need to be voted on in the Knesset. Okay, and the Speaker of the House calls that vote, and he was going to delay it as long as possible for just because. Hopefully that with the hope that it was going to collapse or something or other. Nir Orbach from Yamina, that he was ostensibly in this group, the Change Coalition, he said, no, I'm going to oppose this. I don't think we should be doing that. So that brings him below the threshold, but then was unilaterally endorsed by all 6 of the joint list speakers. Okay, joint 6 of the joint list members of Knesset. That, remember, was the ones who were not going to be included in there, which included the Israeli Communist Party and so on and so forth. However, Yesh Atid and Yamina said, no, thanks, but we really don't need your help. That would cause more harm than good. And Yamina even said, fine, we'll just wait, because at some point the Yariv Levin has to call for the election. So they were just going to wait. On the 13th of June, the new government nominated Miki Levy, who is from Yesh Atid, to be the new the new speaker. And finally, the vote was held on the 13th of June, which was 8 days ago. And the 8 parties of the coalition, they have an absolute majority of 62 members. And although one Yamina MK, Amichai Chikli, has ruled out supporting the new government. And so I hope everyone can catch their breath now, and we could see that we got there. And that was only over the course of 6 or 7 weeks. Okay, I was exhausted just doing this research. It was quite incredible how this would work. But if you look here on the seats, we're still on, the new government. Can you see that? I hope. I'm not sure. Well, we'll get them back in here. But I'll try and answer some questions, and you could see what the new government looks like. Well, there he is. So the new government looks the following. So we have Yesh Atid, right? Yesh Atid with Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, blue and white, Yamina, Naftali Bennett, Labor, Israel Beitenu, New Hope, Meretz, and United Arab List. Okay, so on the left, you remember, these are the left-wing parties, and Yamina, Joint List, and United Arab List. So the Joint List is not on there, but the United Arab List is. And from the right, you have Yamina and New Hope. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parties. 8 parties in this coalition government. 8 parties. Now, what does that mean? Well, who knows? But let's see if I can answer some of these questions. So the first question was, I don't think finding one strong leader. I think there needs to be structural changes to how the elections are done, but also understanding that there's a fractured society right now. There has been talk of raising the point at which a party qualifies to have representation in the government, and therefore raising that from the current, I think it's 3% to 5%, say, or something like that, will decrease the amount of power of these smaller parties, but it does also decrease the representation of the various different people. But there's that's a whole other discussion to be had. But one strong leader I don't necessarily think is the right answer. I think a more robust democracy is perhaps the way to go with that. I mean, you could see in countries around the world with one strong leader doesn't necessarily lead to a strong and stable government. Bob, try bets. Bibi should have realized his popularity has dropped too low to push through. Likud should have replaced him. They tried on a variety of occasions over the last couple of years, but Bibi has a stranglehold on there, and it was not to be. He was so it did not succeed. Gene Gelman writes, does that, well, I assume it's Howard and Gene Gelman together. Does that mean an Arab who is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood has power over the Israeli government? Not necessarily, no, because again, this is the Arab Joint List, not the, what was the other one? Sorry. Not the Joint List, excuse me, the United Arab List is the one that's there. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that has been done. They are one of the powers, one of the parties in here. And I think there is, at least at the moment, a commitment to trying to move forward so I don't think that our Muslim Brotherhood has any influence here at the moment.
Isn't Abbas the Muslim Brotherhood?
Don't you just love, so Sue Hoffbauer, don't you just love a country where a guy can become a prime minister with only 7 members in his party? Let's hope he turns out to be a great one. Oh yes, because Naftali Bennett, yes, he had 7. Yes, 7. Yamina had 7 seats there, but for this to work, you needed to include him and some of the other ones. And why he became the one that was so much more important than, say, Yesh Atid with Yair Lapid with 17 seats. Kacha, that just became. I mean, it inevitably was going, when you're going to have a unity government. There was a way that Yesh Atid could have been the major party and just rotate and give away all the different ministerial positions. They decided to do it in this manner. And Miriam, do you think that there is any chance of an electoral reform, and if so, by increasing the mandates? I'd like to think so. Whether that's actually going to happen or not, I don't know. I think that's one way. I mean, it has it's not all upside if you do that, but that is one way it's just understand that, like, this is one of the characteristics, I should say, of a parliamentary system where you have multiple different parties, and it's very difficult. As far as I know, Israel has never had a majority government from one party, never. And so this is just one of the characteristics. Will that change the issue, increasing the percentage of mandates? It might help. Will it solve the problem? I don't know. Jody, what happens if one of the parties has a hiccup and changes its mind about not being happy about how things are going? Well, then the coalition will collapse. That's why we're where we are now, because Netanyahu reneged on the agreement that he had before. The government collapsed and they called new elections, and here we are again. So if one, because now they have 62 seats, but one of them has said they're not going to support the government, therefore they're at 61 seats. So if they have another defection, even from one member or one party, bang, that's it, we're done. They can try and have negotiations, but they don't solve it, then we're going to be in the same situation where we are now. Robert Winberg, to clarify an earlier query by me regarding expression of supply and confidence is used often in Westminster systems, meaning that crossbenchers agree not to oppose a government on those issues and reserve the right to oppose other measures. Thank you. I living there, and I didn't realize that was actually a thing. But yes, that is absolutely the case. Now, what's really, really interesting is the ministers. It's incredibly diverse. You have, I believe it was something like 9 or 10 females in the female members in the coalition, which I think is fantastic. You also have a serious discussion of trying to come up with some way to address the challenges within Israeli society. You've seen an attempt already with the formation of this inquiry into the Meron stampede. You're going to have also an attempt to look at the situation with funding towards the ultra-Orthodox. You're going to have, now whether that goes through or not, I don't know, but crucially understand the ultra-Orthodox, the religious parties are not part of the government, okay? They're in the minority. Now, what that's actually going to mean, I don't know. Whether there's actually going to be substantive change, I don't know. I know there's talks about it. I know Naftali Bennett, Victor Lieberman, and to a certain extent, Yair Lapid were definitely in support of some kind of redressing these issues in the way that they have become. But I think having a fairly diverse cabinet, I think, is a tremendous step forward, a tremendous step forward. So we'll see what actually happens and what they're able to do. Because remember, this is a coalition, a government coalition that spans the political spectrum and includes the Arab parties, okay? Or at least some of the Arab parties. So I encourage people to temper their expectations, because this is not a government mandate the government has been given a mandate from, say, the right or the left. It is going to be all over the shop, if you will. So I expect incremental changes on certain things, not necessarily radical revolutionary change. Sue Hofbauer, I fear that Bibi will follow in Rudd and Turnbull's footsteps and spend his time in opposition. White anting? What does that mean? This new government. Do you agree? I'm not familiar with the term white anting. Is that Sue, can you undermining? Damn you, autocorrect. Yeah, I got you. Sorry, I'm sorry. Undermining the government. Well, I suppose that's always a risk, okay? I suppose that's always a risk, and it's possible that it could happen. But understand now, even with 30 seats, he's in the minority. He's not in the, so there's a limit to what he can do, okay? When Turnbull, are you referring to when Turnbull was deposed in the spill? Because then he resigned from the government completely, didn't he? So he wasn't even in parliament to make a mess. Netanyahu technically is in the government still, in the opposition. He's still technically leader of the party. Typically, what happens sometimes is in these situations when the leader, their party loses an election, they are forced to step down or resign as leader or something like that. I have a feeling that's not going to happen. I have a feeling for the moment, they're going to try everything they can to undermine this fragile coalition. And make no mistake, it is a fragile coalition. What's interesting is this is the first time, okay? This is the first time, oh no, excuse me. There was that one, there was the breakoff party in when was Kadima? In 2005. So except for Kadima, this is the first time that the parties, either the left-wing coalition, Labor or Likud, because what was that party's name again? The Kadima party was an offshoot of Likud. And it was, that was, I don't even think they exist anymore. It took members from Likud and Labor politicians. They formed this new party with Ariel Sharon, and that didn't exist really too long after that. I think they ceased. I mean, it collapsed. But now you're going to have Naftali Bennett and Yesh Atid party, who are not Labor, they're not Likud. Sorry, I keep looking up there because my thing is up there. That they are going to be leading the government, right? So for the first time, you're going to have this Likud and Labor for the first however long they were leading the government for forever in Israel. There had never been a time, and I would even the Kadima party, I would even consider that here there was a centrist party, but they were made up primarily of members from Labor and Likud. So I don't know if I would consider that not part of that voting bloc. So it's actually really, really groundbreaking to have this kind of government with these different parties with new, fresh ideas who are leading rather than Labor and Likud. Dalia, I think it's awesome. Transport, education, interior environment, aliyah, energy, social equality, economy, science, led by women. I think that's brilliant. Miriam says, Italy has a history of coalition governments which don't last very long. Yes, that is true. I think they have something like, at one point they had like 40 something parties in their parliament. I don't remember how many seats there are, but that seems like an awful lot. And you're speaking to an American, we're like, yeah, we have 2 parties and a couple independents in our Congress, which doesn't really help either because nothing gets done there either. But be that as it may, and Israel could change from this inevitable outcome by deciding on a smaller number of divisions among its populations, which could still give voters a broad choice. A threshold of 10% would give 10 parties the possibility of being in government. I am by no means, and I haven't done barely any research on that, but there's a variety of things that could be done and could be changed. And you have that, I think you have here in Australia, you have what's it called? Ranked choice voting, I think, or something like that. I think that's what it's called. And you're starting to have that in certain places in the US, for example. Like right now, I think there's a mayoral election in New York City, and they've adopted a ranked choice system. And so you can have a huge amount of candidates and parties, but if you're not over a certain threshold, then you're, and I'm explaining this system to Australians who use it all the time, I'm sorry. So that is a possibility of something they could look at. But I think something, there is, I think, a growing sense that there is a stalemate in Israeli politics and something needs to change. So are there any, preferential voting. But I think it's interesting also they're saying one of the things they want to institute is mandatory voting for everybody involved, which I think would be great. What do I think is going to happen to is there any other questions on what I've been talking about before I try and prognosticate on what I think might happen in this coalition? Nope. Excellent. So everybody is clear about how this government came into being, this crazy set of circumstances, right? Like I said, I was exhausted just studying and learning it. The history was yeah. So what's going to happen? I think we're going to see, as I was talking to someone the other day about this, groups or parties or associations that come together defined by what they're not or what they're against have a hard time accomplishing much of anything. And I mean, if the Change Coalition is only and simply about changing and getting rid of Netanyahu, well, okay, you've done that now. Now what? Right? You've accomplished your goal. Netanyahu is no longer prime minister. Now what? And so they seem to have a few. Yeah, thank you, Jody. It was an insane set. My notes are like pages and pages and pages of like bullet points. This happened on this day, this day, this day, this day. It was exhausting. But there are some priorities that I think they want to see to immediately. The forming of the coalition, I think they want to, there's a reaction against the reaction to the person being in power for so long and consolidating power for that long. The analogy that I come to is in the United States after Franklin Roosevelt was elected 4 times as president. Not long after he was out of power, they came up with the 25th Amendment, I think it was, limiting the president to 2 terms. It was a reaction, and by the way, supported not just by the Republicans who were against, but also the Democrats. I think it was an understanding that someone who's in power for that long can cause problems. The consolidation of which there isn't enough of a turnover, and you start to see undemocratic trends when someone is in power for that long, which is not necessarily the case, but it has a tendency for that to happen. So I think you're going to have the commission, which I already said is already, I think it was yesterday, the day before, it's already been established. I think this government is going to push through these changes to the prime minister role. That it will be there'll be effectively term limits. I think you're going to see also a raft of things passed, ethical and legal rules in place to protect against abuse of power, but also to formally state, which was sort of understood already, if you are indicted, you shouldn't be there. Netanyahu wasn't breaking the law when he did not step down when he was indicted. There was tradition. It was, but it was no, right? In much the same way, I suppose, when people say, well, Trump broke the law by not releasing his taxes. No, he didn't break the law. It was a tradition. And that's why now there's a reaction you see in the US. There is a raft of anti-corruption measures and ethical rules that were understood, but never enacted as law. They will now be, they're attempting to push them and make them into law. I think when, as a people, as a government, as a nation, when you have to start writing down these ethical rules to make them law, you've lost something. You can't just deal, perhaps it's necessary, because you're always going to find people who are going to try and undermine and find the loopholes and the cracks in the system. And that, by the way, that's not a fact. That's not the characteristic of the right or the left. That's a characteristic of human nature. You will always find people who are trying to push and skirt the boundaries of where things are. So I think at the outset, that is going to be what the government is going to attempt to do. And I think you're already starting to see that. I think you're going to also, I think there's a sigh of relief, and I think there's going to be a tremendous push to try and keep this government together for as long as possible. Whether it survives the 4 years, unclear. I don't know. I think there's a sense of relief that there's finally a functioning government. There is finally a government that is, I'm not going to say stable, because that remains to be seen. I think the longer they're in power, the more stable they will be. But I will reserve judgment. If I was a betting man, will they finish their 4-year term? I don't know. I really don't know. It should be convicted. What's it? Monica? You mean he? I think. I'm not sure who you're talking about.
I'll just say it should be convicted, because indicted isn't proof that actually happened. That's all. In reference to any court charges.
You're sorry. Okay, you're talking about Netanyahu. He should be convicted.
Well,
I want to be clear. Just because someone's been indicted.
Well, that's it. That's my point.
Netanyahu has been indicted on 3 or 4. 3. I think it's 3 charges. I did that session last year. He's not guilty. The trial is on. The trial is actually happening, I think, now. So I want to be clear. It's not. It's not a done deal, and there's lots of things that has to happen. There's also the outgoing justice minister, not the justice minister, sorry, excuse me. The outgoing attorney general did indict Lipsman, whatever his name was, the one who held up the extradition of Malka Leifer. So he's indicted and under investigation as well. So there is some judicial things that are working their way through. And just because the government has changed doesn't mean those are going to go away. I think you will see that now that Netanyahu is no longer prime minister, a lot of the protections that he enjoyed will not be there. And I think perhaps it's possible the trial will move a little bit faster. What will actually ultimately happen, I have absolutely no idea with that trial. But I think the government moving forward, I hope, will be able to accomplish some things, because I think some of their priorities, I think most people would agree with. There's a huge amount of support for changing the way, for example, the chief rabbinate works among secular Israelis, which, by the way, is a vast majority of the country. There is a huge amount of support for changing the way the kashrut supervision works. There is, I don't know if huge support, but there is support to improving Israeli Arabs' living conditions. There is support for, what was the other things that they wanted? It's just getting these parties to all actually sit down and agree. And now you have this unity government there. Hopefully, these things, without the specter of the trial and indictments and such of that they can actually sit down and hammer out these agreements. And they're going to be compromises. I don't think it's going to be everything that the left wants or everything the right wants. And perhaps, maybe naively, that there is a way now to begin to move forward away from the power, from the cult of personality around one person, to a broad governing coalition, and moving in that way. Any questions, any comments, anything people would like to share? We have about 5 minutes left. Sorry, I thought I was going to give more time for comments and questions there. I apologize. But there was, you could see, a huge amount of dates, and it's important to go through the details just to show you how complex and complicated this what was it they say? You don't ever want to see the sausage being made, right? Sometimes you don't really want to see the way the government is made. But we got there. We have a government. We need the white smoke. Habemus governmentus, whatever you say, right? So, no, we're not talking about the Pope. I'm sorry. So any questions, comments, anything someone would like to share or say? Now is the time. A tour de force. Thank you, Peter. Yes, that's actually, Bob, if you don't mind, I'm going to say that out loud. And if I underemphasize it, and I really think it's really important to say this again to make sure that we understand. There is an Arab party in the government of Israel, okay? There is an Arab party in the government of Israel. And it's something that, I mean, could you imagine a Jewish party in the Iraqi parliament or the Saudi, well, they don't have a parliament, but right, it's just not something that you would see. And it's nothing less than earth-shattering, this precedent, because remember, Arabs make up 20% of the Israeli population. And for the first time, they have representation in the majority parties and governments, which I think is astounding and amazing. Remains to be seen what they do with that, but I think this is nothing less than earth-shattering in the sense of the uniqueness of the moment, that there is an Arab party in the government. And I think if it allows them to have, it brings stability to the government and it brings their voice to the table. They are 20%. I think it's just, I think it's really, really important to make sure we don't underestimate the importance of that. Thank you, Jane Houston. You're welcome. Great. No other comments or questions. You can unmute yourself and just talk, I think. Yeah, rebuilding unity is vital. Hopefully this leads to that. Hopefully this leads to that. Okay. I've had a wonderful, wonderful time chatting with everybody. Well, it's weird. I've done most of the talking this time. I usually don't like to do that. I like to.
Thanks, Rafi.
everyone, I wish you a wonderful, dry, happy, healthy. I can see some blue sky. Oh, some blue sky. Fantastic. And we will see you soon. Remember, I'm pretty sure it's Rabbi Mordecai next week. Reverend Zworenstein the week after that. And then I'm back, and we have presentations from two different, you'll see, we'll send the info out. And again, I want to thank Ollie for the seamless technology that we've had here. Everyone say thank you to Ollie. And we will see everybody very, very soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Monday.
Okay. Thank you, Rafi.
Thank you,
Rafi.
Rafi.
Thanks,
Thank you
Rafi.
very much.
Thank you, Rafi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rafi.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.